The war in Ukraine has displaced millions of people, including so many children. I spoke with a UNICEF worker on the ground in Ukraine right now on how this organization is working to make sure kids have what they need through all of this. It's not just food and clothing, but also their mental health needs.
Children in Ukraine need peace. They need a ceasefire. They need the war to stop. Because we are able to supply medical equipment to hospitals. I was at a hospital the other day in Lviv, in the basement where they set up an intensive care unit for premature babies, and we were able to supply medical equipment, critical midwifery equipment, obstetrics, and supplies to that hospital. And also today in Zaporizhzhia, we were providing surgical supplies. The tent that we visited, where around 22 children have been in that unit since the start of the war. There was a couple of children there right now who had bullet wounds, and so we're able to provide those supplies. We're also, one of the critical things of this crisis is that it is a child protection crisis, and what that means is children are living through the horrors of war. And what we need to do is, as quickly as we can, essentially, is to provide psychosocial support to those children who have lived through the conflict, and providing emotional support, giving children an opportunity to play, to be children, essentially. For example, in Kharkiv, in a town in the north that's been heavily affected by the fighting, we were able to work with a partner to get support to 29 metro stations where children were sheltering underground to stay safe. So that children could play a little bit underground, could get some emotional support as well down there, despite sort of living through this sort of dark, damp place. And we're also able to provide supplies, water, emergency sort of water supplies to certain areas, and then also working with the Ministry of Education to scale up online learning. So children who are on the move, both inside Ukraine and outside, can still do some learning when they're able to. This is a child protection crisis. We have 2.5 million children inside Ukraine who are displaced. We have 2 million children who are outside Ukraine now, living as refugees. And it's really, it's a massive crisis of trauma. Children who have lived through the horrors of having to shelter underground, mothers who have been trying to sort of shield their children from the conflict somehow. And we've met sort of children across Ukraine who have spoken about sort of the horrors they've lived through, but also what they've done to try and sort of alleviate that. So bringing like one bag with them from home, a bag that they could grab. For example, a 13-year-old girl I met in Lviv at the railway station had brought her beads with her, which was like to make bracelets and necklaces, because that was her hobby. And she managed to keep that bag and run out with it and keep it. A boy that we met today, a 9-year-old in Zaporizhzhia, had managed to bring some Lego from his home, which was under attack. So it's children trying to be children, trying to keep their childhood, and UNICEF is working, with partners to try and help do that as much as we can.
And sometimes, when being over here in the US, you continue to see the images and hear it, because it's been over a month now, sometimes people can forget about the continued and growing need. Can you just talk about some of that when it comes to helping these families?
The need is massive, and it's ever evolving, because the conflict is changing all the time, and that means people are still moving from different areas. So as the conflict changes, people flee certain areas. The reality is that no one wants to leave home. So people, as long as they can, because they want to be safe at home, they want to be at home and near relatives, near friends. But when the situation gets too dangerous, particularly for their children, then people have to move. And that's when we also have to respond, when we can reach them with psychosocial support, with hygiene kits, with medical support where necessary. But it's also about trying to access the hardest to reach areas, and that's areas that are under heavy attack. And we are able to get supplies into some of those areas, not all of them, but that work goes on. And it's really about alleviating the suffering of children and the horror of having to live through war for any child, and how parents are doing what they can to try and protect their children from the conflict, trying to keep them safe, but also trying to alleviate that suffering and trying to sort of keep them in some form of childhood as much as they can.
And Toby, can you touch on I know there's trafficking concerns and exploitation. Of course, during conflict, this is a concern, and really all the time this is a concern. Can you touch on that and the issue there?
Yeah, I think in the situation inside Ukraine and outside is when you have so many children on the move with their mothers or with extended family, because they've had to leave fathers behind, they've had to leave husbands behind. That's always a massive risk, trafficking and other issues, gender-based violence. So what UNICEF is trying to do is we're trying to make sure there are points at strategic locations where people are on the move that can provide vital information on how to try and avoid trafficking. So when people flee over the borders, for example, there are people there who may be claiming to help, but might not always be there with good intentions. And it's making sure that people are aware of that and that they have the information that they need at hand. But it's also about having child protection services, both the national authorities who have been providing amazing services, but also UNICEF helping to step in, helping on screening of children to make sure they're with someone who's nurturing and caring for them and that are not at risk of trafficking.
I know UNICEF is also deploying different resources and supplies. Can you talk about the vast network that's happening with UNICEF right now on the ground there?
Yeah, the longer the war goes on, the more impact it has on children, of course, and the longer the impact and the development of children will be affected. So UNICEF is working, across the board, across the organization. We have supplies that come in from our department, our supply warehouse in Copenhagen. We are able to move those across the country quickly. We're looking at procuring more supplies sort of within Ukraine itself where possible. And we have a network of experts who can come in and support where the gaps are. So where UNICEF can really add value to the response and really reach the hardest to reach children. So today we were in Zaporizhzhia, a town in southeast Ukraine, and at a reception center where people who are fleeing very heavy areas of fighting, we're able there to quickly give people some winter clothes, to quickly provide some sort of protection support at that spot. And that's what we need to scale up across Ukraine, but also across the region.
And what would you say is the greatest need now that we're so far into this as these needs continue to change?
The greatest need for children in Ukraine is peace. They need the war to stop. They need to feel safe. They need to be able to be at home. They need to resume their childhood. While the conflict goes on, we need children to be protected. Children must be protected even when conflict is happening. And that goes for all sides. So that's absolutely critical. For children who are stuck in areas of heavy fighting, they need to be allowed to leave if their mothers or family members so wish. But we also need to be able to get supplies in to alleviate some of that suffering in those hardest areas. And while the war goes on, the longer the conflict goes on, the more impact on the well-being of children, both physical and mental. And so UNICEF is trying to reach as many children as we can to provide the emotional support now that we can help to alleviate some of the longer term impact that will affect children, not only their sort of gender, but also in the future income generation, education, all sorts of issues that can arise out of conflict.
What can people do here to help?
I think the support from donors, the support from individuals across the world has been phenomenal. Really, UNICEF is extremely grateful to everyone who has supported our response inside and across the region for children in Ukraine. And I think that we will continue to need resources. The conflict is evolving all the time. More children will become in need areas, but then more other children will need to reach those areas to provide that response when we are able to. But that needs resources. So UNICEF is very grateful for what we've received so far. We always need more resources to be able to respond, but we also need the conflict to stop, and we need everyone to be in solidarity with Ukraine's children to call for the conflict to stop. So, I mean, the situation inside Ukraine really is a child protection crisis. It's a situation where children are stuck in areas that are under heavy fighting, but also children who are on the move are just with their mothers or with extended family. Fathers, husbands have been left behind, and they're extremely vulnerable. And that's why the protection of those children on the move is so vital, both inside Ukraine, but also outside. And that's what UNICEF is working with partners to try and improve as quickly as we can, both the screening of children at transit centers, but also some basic support when they get to those centers. So areas to play, opportunities to have some light relief and get information and guidance on where they can go next in terms of finding accommodation, transport, and other resources.
And you can help make sure the families get what they need. The Illinois Broadcasters Association and CBS are coming together to support UNICEF. Visit unicefusa.org/Illinois to learn more about how you can make a difference. You'll also find more information at cbschicago.com.